Welcome back to the Unacceptable News. I'm your host, Justin Bush. Today's story is about the Pascagoula UFO incident. So this story really starts with two men, one by the name of Calvin Parker and the other Charles Hickson. So it was alleged on October 11th, 1973, these two men went fishing. Calvin Parker was 19 years old at the time, and Charles Hickson was 42. They both worked together and were family friends for many years. Charles Hickson knew Calvin Parker's parents very well, and Calvin Parker came down to Charles Hickson's house essentially to get a job at a local shipyard where he was a supervisor, type of foreman in the shipyard. That night, after work, the two men decided to go fishing on the banks of the Pascagoula River, which is where this UFO case gets its name from. It was said that as they fished for some time, they decided that they might leave because they weren't getting the fish that they wanted to catch, and they were thinking about going to a different location. So while they're down in this dirty, ugly kind of industrial park where they're not supposed to be fishing in this area, they're apparently off of an old dock that was closed to the public. They decided, we're not getting the fish we want. Maybe we'll leave soon. Calvin wanted to try another location. Charles kind of was like, give it some time. Essentially, they heard a sound behind them. Some people describe it as a whirring sound. Sometimes they describe it as kind of an air leaking sound, like an air from a tire. They turn around to see this bright blue light and this strange object hovering over the water. This object, a small door slid open on this object, and three creatures descended, floated down to the ground near the men. It was said that they were awestruck, they were terrified. These creatures came up and grabbed them and essentially took them on board this craft and gave them what amounts to be some sort of medical procedure to both men. When the creatures came down from the craft, it was said that they looked like a mummy, or perhaps made out of elephant skin. They said that they had two appendages coming out of the sides of the head that looked like carrots sticking out of the side of the head, so similar to a snowman, but coming out from the ears. It was said that they had a slit for a mouth, they had no eyes, almost no noticeable nose, and they had claw-like appendages for hands. Sometimes they're described as mummified or mummies because of the way that their skin looked around their body, like maybe something that was wrapped in bandages like a mummy would be. Sometimes it's described as elephant skin. They had this extremely wrinkly colored skin all over their body. Now these creatures came down, descended from the craft, and two of them grabbed Charles Hickson and one grabbed Calvin Parker. Now Calvin Parker was alleged to have blacked out instantly, and then Charles Hickson was alleged to have remembered a little bit more. Since this incident, both men are now deceased. Now, Charles Hickson really didn't speak about his encounter all that much in vivid detail, but Calvin Parker did for a period of time, and then because of the public backlash and how much it cost him to talk about this story, he kind of became a recluse from the news agencies and the people that wanted to pry into what happened. So for many years, he didn't speak about it at all. And a few years ago, approximately 6 years ago, he decided to write two books. He wrote the book, The Closest Encounter, and The Closest Encounter, The Story Continues. Now, The Closest Encounter goes into much more detail about what happened to Calvin Parker on the ship than he had ever gone into publicly before, at least anything that I can find. His story continues, the Pascagoula Closest Encounter, the story continues. In that, they go into some of the scientific evidence as well as multiple eyewitnesses to the event. It turns out there were several other people that saw this craft that night that did not come forward for some time. One was in the Navy. He was worried that he would lose his security clearance if he spoke up. And eventually, once he retired, he did admit that he was driving by a bridge nearby and saw this object. But anyway, it's a fascinating story about these two men and the abduction that took place, or allegedly took place, on October 11th in 1973. So when these men were released from this medical exam, they eventually went to the sheriff's office. So they were separated interrogated for some time, many hours, and brought back together. What they didn't know was that the sheriff had secretly recorded them when they were in the room together. And we can play that recording right now.
I understand you're crazy. But yeah, when he brought you out of that damn thing, when he brought me out, well, I like to know when the hell you were. God damn, I like to know when the hell got you straightened out, man. I didn't know it. I remember my heart was just froze out, just like that. I couldn't move it, just like I stepped on a damn rattlesnake. They didn't do me that way, though. I passed out. That's the first time I ever passed out in my life.
Now, in that recording, both men were talking to each other about the events that took place. They were both extremely troubled and traumatized. They had no idea they were being secretly recorded. So when the sheriff and the deputies looked at the recording, or they listened to the recording, they realized that the men were serious and they believed them. They eventually contacted an Air Force base. An Air Force base brought the two men to do an examination of them. They were worried about some sort of contaminants or radiation, any sort of biological or radiological contaminants that might get people sick. Calvin Parker reported that he was so scared about what happened to him that he washed himself in bleach when he came home. As time went on, both men started to admit to more and more details of this story. Charles Hickson did a presentation at one point in time where he told the public that he had not just had the one encounter, but he had had multiple. In fact, he openly reported that his wife and child became a witness to one of these encounters. There was a UFO that flew near them while they were driving. He attempted to jump out of the car and go meet the UFO. His wife grabbed onto him and stopped him from leaving the car. He said that after that event, he started to meet them at a local farm where he started to get information about the future. So these creatures are alleging that there's going to be some trouble in the future, and that essentially this nuclear trouble could end our civilization. Now, he did stipulate that he believes that we're going to be okay, but essentially they are warning about the loss of our civilization due to this nuclear energy. So he specifically talks about hydrogen nuclear energy, like the hydrogen bomb. So we're going to play a clip from Charles Hickson's own testimony about his additional encounters.
I'm an outdoorsman. When I'm not working, I do a lot of fishing and a lot of hunting. There happened to be a tree farm there close by my home that about 750 acres that I spent a lot of time on in hunting and fishing. There's a fine stream with a pond there. But I had gone back in there fishing, hunting in January, and I was sitting down under a hickory nut tree, squirrel hunting, and this same craft that Calvin and myself had seen in Pascagoula came down in an area close by me. And up until then, I was very frightened. I was afraid to go out at night by myself. I didn't know what was going to happen. But they just seemed, I was sitting down under the tree, it just seemed a voice came to me that to not be afraid, that they didn't mean me any harm, that they would be another place at another time. And it frightened me all of a sudden, but then I immediately got up and went straight home. My wife was alarmed that I didn't continue my hunting, so I told her what happened. But all the fear was gone, that these things didn't mean us any harm, that I thought in the future I would get to meet them. And in the May of that same year, in Mother's Day, we had gone up to my father's farm up in further up in Mississippi to spend a day with my mother. And we were coming home late at night, my wife and myself and three of our children, and we had a terrible experience. They thought it was terrible. We were coming in a area that was not very populated, a wooded area off the main highway coming home, and there was a light that kept following us, and later on it came around in front of the car and was coming down in the road to land, and when my wife saw it, she just became hysterical, and my youngest daughter at that time, she was a baby. In fact, she graduated high school this year. She came along late in life. But anyway, she was quite young, and she was asleep, and it alarmed her, and she had awakened and was screaming. My wife was screaming. But this craft moved back up to the end, into the sky, and it moved around to our right, and moved out into a field, and came down and lit the entire area up, and had a row of lights all the way around the craft. Well, we had stopped the car at that time, and I was trying to get out of the car. I knew it was my time to meet them. And before I could get out of the car, my wife was screaming, and my youngest son, and she held me and wouldn't let me out of the car. So then the voice came to me again, this is not the time. It'll be another time. And we left. My wife became so hysterical that we left, and I could see, looking back, that the craft was still there, hovering when we left. It was a lot larger craft than what Calvin and myself had seen. But anyway, they wanted to, someone wanted me to call the Keeley Air Force Base. But I said, there's no use. There's no use of notifying anyone. There's nothing anyone can do. It's something I have to handle myself. So we didn't tell anyone about this over a period of years. And a lot of things that I can't talk about is kind of personal, that we've had other encounters since then. It's come to a point now that the tree farm that I had mentioned, there's very few people that goes into that area, and when I've been there many times, I go there many times now, and that's where these things contact me. I have a feeling that I have to go there. When I go there,
I saved hundreds with Liberty Mutual. Liberty, liberty, liberty. Liberty.
This is the reason why I've canceled my doorbell camera subscription.
This brand new subscription-free mini Wi-Fi camera.
Alone, I go there for that purpose. And they have painted a beautiful picture to me that what a world could be without pollution. That we were on the verge of destroying ourselves on nuclear hydrogen energy. And if we didn't stop this, if this wasn't stopped or something wasn't done about our environment, that we would be destroyed again. But I think now that it seems that there is being something done. We notice the threat of nuclear or hydrogen energy is beginning to fade a little bit. Communism is going away. People are taking more interest in our environment and the pollution that we're putting in the air. Excuse me, I'm just a little bit hoarse. But I think we are going to see a world change that we're going to find answers to our pollution of our environment. I think the threat of nuclear and hydrogen energy will go away. These things have told me that this is something that's way out. I mean, it's hard for me to stand before you and tell you this. But it's something I've kept to myself for a long time. But there's an energy out there that we haven't discovered yet. It's an energy that, for instance, the movement of the planets in our universe, in our solar system, there's an energy that moves these planets. And I think they've learned how to tap this energy. It's something that's there, it's free. And I think in the days to come, in the very near future, that we're going to tap into some energy that's going to make everything else obsolete. I think we're going to see a much better and a more beautiful world.
Now, Calvin Parker, in his books, also went on to describe additional information. So he describes attempting to kill the creature that was examining him on the ship. And later on, before he died, he had gotten cancer later on in his life. About a year or so before he died, he reached out to reporters and wanted to tell them something that he said he had been keeping secret for some time. Now, he told them that on the ship they had showed him the future, much like they had showed Charles Hickson. And he said that they showed him coronavirus, and they also showed him World War III. And he said he's not sure if these events are going to transpire, but essentially he was so worried about what they had showed him, he had kept it secret for 50 years, and he didn't want to take it with him when he died. Now, it was later found out that he had had cancer and that he died shortly after giving this testimony to the local reporter. Now, this hasn't been widely reported, although some newspaper agencies have picked it up. So between the two men's stories, the additional witnesses, their testimony, both of them corroborating this sort of warning of future events, specifically what you might describe as nuclear warfare, this is a story that should be examined in the most minute detail. It's one of my favorite UFO stories simply because of how much conviction the men had shortly after the encounter happened. It is extremely rare that anybody calls the police after a close encounter, and it's even more rare that these men would be recorded in secret without anyone's knowledge. So this recording that we showed earlier shows that even without knowing that they're being recorded, they're treating this as a real situation that really happened, regardless of what anybody else says. And so really, what do you think? Do you think this is a legitimate UFO encounter? Did these men really have these meetings with unknown creatures that warn them about the future, or is this simply a large hoax? If you'd like to support our channel, go to the description or in the pinned comment down below. That's the Unacceptable News. Don't like, don't subscribe, just run.